Okay, so I'll just dive right into it because we have a very short time. In this paper, I argue that money returns to its original form, a form of account keeping in socialism, and understanding its working there provides us a unique ringside seat on its abuse in capitalism to facilitate rentier activity and strangle productive activity. This is very much a work in progress, and I welcome comments and suggestions of useful works that will help me do this better. Moreover, today I can only give a bare outline of the project, which looks at the Soviet system from the perspective I have developed in my writings on geopolitical economy, on Marx, Keynes, and Polanyi, on money, on financialization, and its role in the gold and dollar systems. What role will money play in socialism? Will it be abolished in communism? The short answer is that money will become a means, not an end. It will no longer represent command over abstract labor and value because the economy will increasingly produce use values with concrete labor. Money will no longer be required to behave like a commodity and will no longer be a manner of holding wealth. Instead, it will be reduced, or shall we say elevated, to its most rational function as a unit of account that facilitates planned production and as a means of payment that distributes the social product and both expresses and serves to correct imbalances between the first and the second. Hicks remarked in his monetary writings that monetary theory is less abstract than most economic theory. It cannot avoid a relation to reality, which in other economic theory is missing. It belongs to monetary history in a way that economic theory does not always belong to economic history. I think this is as much because capitalist thinkers must systematically misunderstand and misrepresent money um, as because figuring out how it should operate in any society is not necessarily given in any prepared theory or prescription, as the Soviet experience shows. On the one hand, it was successful. It was so successful that it prompted a study published in 1977 by the US National Bureau of Economic Research. It asked how the Soviet system created and maintained the impressive degree of price stability since the middle 50s, largely through the successful management of money, avoiding the surges of speculative consumer buying that have plagued some other socialist countries. The author, Garvey, does not mention it, but the traumatic inflation of the 1970s in his own country could hardly have been far from his mind. On the other hand, as Stefan Varga noted in his remarkable reflections on the Marxist theory of money and Soviet monetary institutions and practices, the Soviet Union arrived at techniques of monetary management only after years of experimentation, rather than through any theoretical preparation. However, we can be better theoretically prepared, learning as we can from the abandoned experiments that lie littered along the long road to world socialism, as well as in ongoing ones, as in China, for example, and from the misuses of money in contemporary financialized rentier plundering capitalism. The enterprise must, however, also deal with numerous misunderstandings about money, not only in the Western mainstream, but also among Marxists. According to me, some of the most prominent of these include the following, and I'm just going to quickly enumerate them before going on to the substance of what I want to say. They include the following misunderstandings: that Marx had a commodity theory of money. There is also the huge obstacle constituted by Marxist economics, which I have long argued continues the vain attempt to fit Marxism into the theoretically and methodologically antithetical framework of neoclassical economics. And it prevents us from seeing that Marxism was not only more holistic, but it was also more historical. And the idea of contradiction lay at its core. There is also the inability to understand what Marx's core problematic was. There is also the inability to understand the essential role of the state in capitalism. And this is where my reflections clearly will overlap a lot with David's very fine critique. The state plays a very essential role in capitalism, both domestically as well as internationally, precisely because left to itself spontaneously, capitalism is contradictory and its contradictions have to be managed. And therefore, the state must and does always play a role both domestically and internationally. Further, in studying contemporary financialization, Marxists have also been unable to theorize it through Marx's historical understanding of money. Following mainstream economics, Marxists have generally followed the mainstream in seeing the financial system of socialist countries, whether the Soviet Union in the past or China today, as merely backward versions of the more developed Anglo-American financial systems. And finally, therefore, they cannot understand why Marx or other Marxists such as Lenin or Hilferding believed that capitalism will create and will be forced to create the institutions on which socialism could be built. So what does this litany of complaints imply for the understanding of money in the Soviet Union, in contrast with money in contemporary capitalist financialized economies? Firstly, as Marx understood, money was an ancient social institution. We know today that it goes back to the clay tablets recording debts in the ancient Near East and exists in actually existing socialist societies. Marx's distinction between labor, which exists independently of any specific social formation, and capitalist wage labor also applies, therefore, to money as a transhistorical category and to capitalist money as being confined to capitalism. Marx was clear that it was not a commodity because he noted how even precious metal coins are accepted not because they contain this or that amount of precious metal, but because they are minted by a political authority that guarantees their worth in metal. Therefore, they are already symbols of themselves. Money was, at best for Marx, a special commodity. Via Ferdinand Tönnies, Karl Polanyi inherited this understanding and proposed that money, like land and labor, was a fictitious commodity. It was not produced for sale and it does not have a cost of production. However, capitalism required it to function as a commodity and sought to make it so through its laws and institutions. The passages where Marx describes the resulting dynamics are the ones that are misread to claim that Marx thought that capitalism needs and gets, that's even more problematic, gets a commodity, money. In reality, much as capitalism may need money to be a commodity, it cannot get it, not least since money is precisely that which is not a commodity. Capitalism has only the bluntest instruments, such as the disastrous currency school restriction on the issue of money, or monetarism today, to impose commodity dynamics on money. The need to make fiat money, the only kind that exists, behave like a commodity. Sorry, they need to make it behave like a commodity. However, such means proved either inflationary or deflationary. Moreover, there is no world state in capitalism and therefore no world money. So world trade is either barter with precious metal bullion serving to settle imbalances, as Marx described, or national currencies such as sterling or the post-1971 dollar become current on a heavily contrived basis on imperial surpluses and on a series of unstable or volatile financializations, respectively. That is, sterling was based on an imperial basis, drawing imperial surpluses. The dollar since 71 has relied on a series of unsustainable and volatile financializations. One may mention here that the present monetary system does not does not differ from the one before 1914 or 1971 because of the role of gold. The real issue is whether monetary policy favors the preservation of the value of previously produced goods and money itself, that is to say, assets and money, or favors the expansion of the production of new goods. In other words, whether it is oriented towards dead labor or whether it favors the employment of living labor.
Radhika, sorry, just a second. Radhika, I got the message from the interpreters that are a little bit slower, if possible. This is what they are asking for. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the real issue in the case of the pre-1914 and pre-1971 money is not whether there's gold or not, but the real issue is whether monetary policy favors the preservation of the value of previously produced goods and money, that is to say, assets and money, or favors the expansion of the production of new goods. In other words, whether it is oriented towards dead labor or whether it favors the employment of living labor. The latter was only favored the latter was only favored in the post-war period to 1940. The latter was only favored. Um, the latter was only favored in the post-war period up to 1971 in the core capitalist countries. Sorry to the translator, there's a misprint there. Secondly, Marx shows that capitalism inherited a financial system suited to medieval purposes, to usury, speculation, and rentier activity. And in early capitalism, only provided short-term commercial credit, whereas personal fortunes had to suffice for productive investment. Capitalism, Marx anticipated, would transform this medieval system into something more suited to financing long-term productive investment. As Hilferding shows in his Finance Capital, it did so, but only it was not in England that it did so. Thanks to the uneven and combined development of capitalism, such a monetary system emerged first in Germany and the United States, contender states challenging British industrial supremacy. Hilferding contrasted the productively vigorous finance capitalisms of Germany and the United States to the productively enervated United Kingdom. In general, since the 1870s, the most productive economies have not been those at the core of capitalism, the UK and the US, which have tended to have these antiquated type systems. The US case is complicated and we can discuss it, but rather the contender states. After 1917, they included socialist countries. Contrasting financial systems, first contrasted by Marx and then Hilferding, have been the core factors. Thirdly, Hilferding is ridiculed for saying that the nationalization of the five big Berlin banks would constitute an advance towards socialism. However, he was simply developing Marx's argument in chapter 27 of volume 3 about the credit system being the form of the transition towards a new mode of production. However, Hilferding was referring not to six London banks. He was referring to 6 Berlin banks, intimately involved with the productive firms in long-term credit relations. Interestingly, all historians of the Soviet monetary system emphasize its continuities with that of the Russian developmental state. It was not the most successful, but the attempt to become a developmental state in Russia had its legacy. Fourthly, in the Soviet system, money functioned chiefly as a unit of account and a means of payment. The function of a measure of value was rendered unimportant in a system of administered prices. They had to reflect relative inputs, of course, particularly labor, to ensure efficiency, but they also reflected conscious social valuation and supply and demand contingencies. The means of circulation function was performed when people purchased consumer goods, but wages were actually not a payment for a commodity, but the discharge of the state's obligations to working people. While price stability was important and ensured by planning rather than interest rate or exchange rate policies, the store of value function was also not important for an economy in which individual fortunes played no role, and any hoards for social investment were actual capital goods whose monetary value was just an entry in the accounts for planning. That being the case, there is no need for hoards of money per se as unconditional command over abstract labor, not even for pensions, which is something I want to work on later on. Finally, for world money, the Soviet ruble served as the principal currency in Eastern Europe and in the communist system as a whole, where accounts were settled on the basis of world prices and presumably some considerations of inter-socialist solidarity. Beyond that, the USSR used US dollars, those that it could obtain, or gold. The Americans were famously disappointed when they were paid for the 1970s grain exports with their own valueless dollars rather than gold. So finally, money as an accounting aid to planning can today be more successful than ever. Advances in information and communication technology came too late for the USSR and its planning system. Today, their feedback loops enable large corporations to do the most minute and detailed forms of planning. They use it, however, to offshore production while controlling it, to aid the concentration and centralization of capital, to indulge in plunder and financial speculation, to increase control over employees and manipulate customers into buying what they have to sell, short-circuiting rather than addressing the demand problem, through proliferating simulacra of false needs in oceans of unfulfilled real need. All these means can instead be used for rational planning, in which money returns to its original use, an instrument for accounting to aid such planning. Thank you very much.